Let's talk a little bit about nouns. I'm not going to spend too much time talking about countable nouns. Just make sure that you review the rules about countable nouns. Essentially, countable nouns are nouns that can be counted. That sounds pretty simple. Countable nouns can have a singular or a plural form. Sometimes the plural form is irregular, but most of the time the plural form is just adding s. Make sure you double check the rules for certain spellings when you add es, if you add different ways that you can change the spelling. Sometimes F changes to a V, so just check those spelling rules to be sure. And then make sure that you're familiar with irregular plural forms, for example, child and children, or woman and women, person and people, things like that. But this video, we're going to mostly focus on non-count nouns or uncountable nouns. Uncountable nouns are nouns that cannot be counted, and that sounds simple, right? But sometimes it's a little bit hard to tell which ones are which. No worries, you don't have to memorize every single noun that is uncountable. There are some categories and some tips that can help you to decide if a noun is countable or uncountable. Just keep in mind that these rules are not 100% of the time. There may be some exceptions to these rules, some nouns that don't follow these categories and patterns, but they are good general guidelines to follow and to help you decide. So the first category of noun that you can use to help you is abstraction. So an abstraction is a noun that represents a concept or things that don't exist physically. So just kind of think of things that are more ideas or concepts, things you cannot physically touch or hold. Some examples here are advice, love, war, peace, happiness, information, fun, and research, right? So think about it. Advice, right? Advice, that's not something I can touch or hold. It's not something physical. Love, right? I can feel it. I know it exists, but it's not something I can physically hold or touch. Information, that's something that exists only in my mind or in a book. It's not something actually physical. Another type of category is activities. Some nouns that represent something that's done in your free time. So some examples of this would be games like chess or checkers, homework, music, reading, sleeping counts as an activity, housework, a lot of sports like tennis or swimming. Those would all be uncountable nouns. Next, kind of two categories that go together. Some uncountable nouns oftentimes are nouns that don't take a clear form, or they have a form that's more fluid or changing. So two examples of this would be gases and liquids. A substance that has no fixed shape and is like air would be a gas. So some examples of that are air, smoke, smog, oxygen, hydrogen, pollution. And then liquids are a substance that are able to flow freely. So examples of that would be water, coffee, tea, milk, wine, blood, soup. Those are all considered uncountable nouns. Now here's another category. This is a category that can be kind of tricky. Food, some food is countable and some food is not. But here are some rules that might help you to decide whether or not a food is countable. So if you don't have to cut or break the food in order to eat it, it is generally countable. So here's some examples: apple, banana, carrot, right? If you imagine, if I pick up an apple and I pick it up to eat it, generally I don't have to cut the apple to eat it. I just eat the apple as a whole. So I would say I ate an apple for lunch. Or I could say something like carrots are a healthy side dish, right? So I can just pick up a carrot and eat it. I don't have to cut it. I can just pick up an apple and eat it. I don't have to cut it. Now, if the food is something that you must cut or break before eating, generally it is uncountable. So here are some examples: beef, chicken, watermelon, cake, fish. So imagine this, right? Imagine if I said, right? If I take a piece of a whole watermelon, right? I take it and I pick it up and I take a bite. No, 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 no. That's not how we usually do things. That's a little weird. Or if I take the whole entire cake or the whole steak, do I pick up a piece of steak and just take a bite of it? No, generally I cut it first. So here I would say I had beef for dinner. Now, I would not say I had a beef for dinner. So these would all be examples of uncountable nouns. Now, this becomes a little bit tricky sometimes when I'm not eating the food. So rule number 1 and rule number 2 apply if you're eating the food. But if you're not eating the food, but rather you're buying, selling, making, or baking it, right? Buying, selling, making, or baking, then the whole entire food, that's when it can actually be countable. So I just gave you the example of a watermelon, right? If I eat a watermelon, that's uncountable when I eat it, right? I eat a piece of watermelon. I cut the watermelon first before I eat it. But if I'm buying it, if I'm at the grocery store, I'm having a party and there's going to be lots of people coming over, I might say I bought 3 watermelons for my party, right? I bought 3 watermelons for my party. Because I'm buying the whole entire melon, not a piece of it. I'm buying the whole thing. Same thing would apply, for example, with a cake. If I'm talking about baking a cake, right? I'm not eating the cake, I'm making it or baking it. Then I can talk about the whole entire cake as one, and then it becomes countable. So I bought 3 watermelons for my party and baked 2 cakes. Now, if I'm going to eat the cake, then I'm not going to eat cakes, right? If I say I ate 3 cakes, that means I ate 3 whole cakes. I would say I ate 3 pieces of cake. Make that uncountable. All right, next category. If something is made up of really, really tiny pieces, small particles or grains, that either cannot be counted or they're difficult to count, then the noun is usually uncountable. So some examples of this would be sand, dirt, dust, corn, flour, wheat, sugar, rice, salt, pasta, hair. Those are just a few examples of this. This next category can be a little bit difficult to wrap your mind around. When you put a number of items that share a particular quality together into one category, the name of the category is uncountable. So here are some examples. All of these items, watches, earrings, necklaces, bracelets, I can count all of those, right? I can have 2 earrings or 3 necklaces or 5 bracelets, right? But when I put them all together as a category, jewelry, that's not countable. I cannot say jewelries. Jewelry is uncountable. This one can be a little confusing. I can count dollars, coins, credit cards, checks, right? Individual dollars. I can have $5 or I can have 3 coins, 2 credit cards. But when I put them all together in the category of money, the category money cannot be counted, right? That's a little unusual. Furniture, luggage, vocabulary, those are some other good examples of categories, groups of similar items that cannot be counted. All right, the next category is natural occurrences. When nouns refer to normal or frequent weather patterns, in other words, weather that we see all the time, these nouns are uncountable. Some examples of that would be weather, rain, snow, humidity, electricity, thunder, lightning, sunshine. Those are all normal weather patterns, so those are all uncountable. However, note, natural disasters like hurricanes, tornadoes, floods, and earthquakes that do not happen normally or are not frequent weather patterns, those are countable. So I can say, for example, a couple of years ago, there were 2 big hurricanes that hit Puerto Rico, right? 2 big hurricanes. I can count the hurricanes. It's natural disaster, not a normal weather pattern. And then finally, subjects of study. Things that a person studies in school are often uncountable. Sometimes this is pretty obvious, but sometimes it's a little confusing because some words for subject actually end in S, and it looks like they're plural, but they're not. So here, this is obvious when I see biology or English, writing, psychology. Those are subjects that people study, but this is where it's a little confusing. Physics, mathematics, economics. Even though they end in S, they are actually singular. So just keep that in mind. Subjects of study are usually uncountable, so they match a singular subject. It actually is possible to count uncountable nouns in a way. If you put the non-count noun in a container or you split the noun into pieces or measurements, you can actually count the container, the piece, or the measurement. So some examples of this would be pieces of advice. I cannot count advice, the noun, but if I split it into pieces or suggestions, then I can count those pieces. Water. I cannot count water, but if I put it into a container, like a glass, then I can count the glasses. So I can't count water, but I can count glasses of water or cups of coffee. If I split pizza into slices, I can count those slices. Gallon or pounds, those are measurements. So if I measure a gallon of milk or I measure a pound of meat, I can count what I measure. Sometimes we reduce the phrase and we use the non-count noun to signify or symbolize the container. So you might hear somebody say, "Can I have a coffee?" So here, a coffee means a cup of coffee. I'm just kind of eliminating cup of, and when I say a coffee, that means the cup. Or we would like 3 waters for the table, right? 3 waters equals 3 glasses of water. I'm just not saying the glasses part, but I still say when I say we would like 3 waters for the table, I still mean that we want 3 glasses of water. One final note about uncountable nouns is that some nouns actually have 2 meanings, a countable meaning and an uncountable meaning. And typically, the non-count meaning is more abstract or general, more of a concept or idea, and the count meaning is more concrete and specific. Here are some examples of that. Time. Time has 2 meanings. The first meaning, when I mean minutes, hours, days, this is a more abstract meaning and therefore it is uncountable. I don't have time to see you today. In other words, I don't have the minutes or the hours to see you today. More abstract, not something I can touch, okay? Time, when it means repetitions or occurrences, this is more concrete and countable. I saw you 3 times last week. In other words, there were 3 repetitions of when I saw you last week. So that meaning is countable. Experience is another good example. The first meaning, if I say knowledge or practice throughout life, that's more abstract. I can't touch it. It's uncountable. She has a lot of teaching experience, uncountable. But when experience means different situations or events, this is more concrete and more specific, and so it's countable. We had many fun experiences while on vacation. In other words, there were a lot of events or situations in which we had fun when we were on vacation. All right, that is it for uncountable nouns. Let me know if you have any questions.